მოგესალმებით, მეგობრებო. Hello everyone, hello dear guests, dear festival participants. Today we are heading for the 6th day of the festival and we're going to open with the discussion about multilingualism in literature and about literature as a medium that can have different languages. And our esteemed participants, Haike Fidler, Tariq ელ-ტაიბი, ორელია ლასაკი, and our own Zurab Khárumyzé from Georgia will be discussing the subject, moderated by Inga, žghentი. First of all, before we start the discussion, I just want to invite on the stage the person who is very instrumental in this all, because you know that the festival this year is held in frames of the Tbilisi World Book Capital 2021 project. And today we have a guest here, Mr. Jan Denison, who's the director of the project from UNESCO. He couldn't be with us at the opening, and we wanted to use this opportunity to give him the stage and listen to his speech before we move on to this interesting discussion. Please, Mr. Jan.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me to have a moment to say hello to everybody and to congratulate you on a very successful literary festival. My job at UNESCO is coordinator of the World Book Capital program, but I'm also the publisher at UNESCO. So UNESCO publishes about 250 books a year, mainly scientific, academic, and promotional books, but I'm also in charge of that. When we talk about multilingualism, I'd like to tell you that UNESCO was one of the first international organizations to actually start multilingualism. In 1947, UNESCO launched a project which was called the Representative Works, where UNESCO found funding and found editorial partners to publish titles from little-known authors into different languages. So UNESCO started something that today is very well known, which is multilingual publishing. And UNESCO, in fact, published over 1,000 titles between 1947 and 2003. Often very well-known authors which could not find their way into small markets. For example, the Japanese author Karabate was translated into Indonesian, and the Urdu poet Faiz was translated into Hungarian. Those are just two examples of what UNESCO was able to do in that project. So UNESCO is a big promoter of multilingualism. We are part of the UN, so it's part of our mandate to promote multilingualism, but also what we call bibliodiversity, to make sure that there is different types of publishing, different types of publishers that have access to the markets, and that's part of our mandate. So I'm very pleased to be here, to be part of this discussion this evening. I'd like to wish you all the best and to hand you back to the people who know a lot more about the subject than myself. Thank you.
So the participants of the panel, please move to the stage. დღეს გვექნება სინქრონული თარგმანი და ქართული თარგმანის მოსასმენად გთხოვთ აიღოთ ყურსასმენები და ჩართოთ პირველ არხზე.
Good evening, dear guests. It's my pleasure to be a moderator of today's discussion with 4 wonderful and amazing authors from different countries of the world. One of them is from Georgia. Let me, before we start, introduce all the authors in person. And at the same time, I would like to take this very opportunity and thank you for a visit here to Tbilisi International Festival of Literature. And I would like to take the very opportunity to thank all the authors and organizers of this festival, which is definitely a wonderful event. Regardless pandemic, they managed to face difficult challenges and make it possible for you to be here. So I'm Inga żghentი, and I have the pleasure to moderate this conversation. So firstly, let me introduce the author, Orelija Lásaki, born in so she's a bilingual poet in French and Occitan, the languages of the medieval troubadours endangered today. Interested in the interaction between various forms of art, she often cooperates with visual artists, video makers, dancers, and particularly musicians. Her books have been translated into a dozen languages. She has been performing her poetry along with songs all over Europe, North and South America, Africa, Indonesia, India, and China. She is at the same time advocate of linguistic diversity. She acts as literary advisor for festivals in France, Italy, and Africa. Orelija Lásaki also collaborates as a screenwriter for the cinema with the director Giuseppe Schillaci in 2019 Transhuman's poetic short form presented at the 76th Venice Film Festival. So I would like at the same time to give a brief information related to Occitan. It's a language many readers will have met before. For example, in the Divine Comedy, Dante gives troubadour Arnaud Daniel, who appears in the Purgatorio, a speech in Occitan. A bit nearer our own time, there are Occitan passages in Kate Moss's 2005 novel Labyrinth. Today, it's spoken in the southern part of France, in Monaco, and in smaller areas of Spain and Italy, regions sometimes collectively known as Occitania. In France, native Occitan speakers are mostly also narrative French speakers, and Lásaki composes in both languages, French and Occitan. And another author we have the pleasure to enjoy the presence today is Heike Fidler. Heike Fidler was born in 1963 in Germany, and after 1987 she has been living in Geneva. She is a multilingual poet, performer, researcher, feminist, and activist. She published 4 poetry books, 1 autobiographic, short story, and a novel. An artist, she explores the relation between performance, text and installation, language and sound, composition and improvisation. She performs her texts with laptop, paper, looper, real-time projections, realizes installations in public space and the staging of multidisciplinary projects. She realizes workshops and field of poetry and performative writing. Fidler participated in the research project Authors Acting on Stage, Self-Conception and Mise-en-Scène, and she's actually a researcher in field of text, writing, sound, performance. She was president and board member of Center Pan in Rome with a special regard for gender issues, and still is a member of World Poetry Movement. And another author we have here today is Tariq el-Taib. He was born in Egypt, Cairo, and currently resides in Austria. Tariq el-Taib was born in 1959 in Cairo as son of Sudanese parents. He has been residing in Vienna since 1984. In his early days, when he was a young kid, he visited a Quran school where he got in touch with the beauty of high Arabic language and fell in love with it. After finishing school, he studied business management in Cairo and worked as an auditor. In the following time, he spent half a year in northern Iraq. There was the experience of the 6-day war. There were times when life took place in a sense of the deserts without electric light, without running water. He participated in degree courses that did not really touch the young man's heart, but at least offered him some narrow chances within the Egypt education system. After that, Tariq el-Taib decided to leave Egypt, left his home and headed for Europe. He has published 5 novels, 2 collections of short stories, 5 poetry collections, 1 play, 1 autobiography, and a collection of essays in Arabic. His books have been published in German, English, Italian, French, Spanish, Macedonian, Romanian, and Serbian translations. His poems have appeared in different languages in various literary anthologies, magazines, and journals worldwide, in Swedish, Chinese, Portuguese, Russian, Ukrainian, Croatian, Bosnian, Maltese, and others. Tariq el-Taib currently teaches at 3 universities in Austria, namely the University of Vienna, University of Graz, and the University of Krems. Tariq el-Taib is a writer whose work is defined by a fine sense of humor, as well as his special approach to impressive imagery created by his eye upon the world. And today I have the pleasure as well to introduce prolific and well-known Georgian author who is here with us today, Zurab Khārumidze. Born in 1957, he studied English language and literature at Tbilisi State University, where he wrote a dissertation on John Donne. For several years, he was a researcher associate at the Center of 20th Century Literary Studies at Tbilisi State University. In 1994 and 95, he was a Fulbright visiting scholar at the University of Wisconsin, working on postmodern American metafiction. 2 of his short stories were published in English in Clockwatch Review, Bloomington, 1997. He was appointed editor of Tbilisi-based English language literary magazines Georgia Caucasus Profile, 1995-2000, and Caucasus Contacts, 2002-2005. He is the author of a collection of short stories entitled Opera, published in 1998, and of several novels, including The Weinberg Sea, published in 2000, and Gigo and the Goat, published in 2003. He co-edited Enough Rose Revolution and the Republic of Georgia, which was published in the United States, New York, 2005, and has written numerous essays on philosophy, cultural history, collective memory, and folk tales, as well as an award-winning book on the history of jazz, 2010. And his novel, Dagny Orella Feast, was published first in Georgia in 2011 and then in 2014 in the USA, which was written in English. So let me move on to the topic of today's conversation, which is writer in a multilingual medium. And I've got, firstly, to ask a number of introductory questions. And the first question is related to circumstances conditioning what make the authors leave their home country. As far as I'm concerned, and as I've looked into their biography, all of them currently reside in a different country, not in their homeland. And so I would like to ask, is this choice related to some kind of career issues, or is there any kind of political background related to this decision that you left your country and decided to live in a foreign country? So I think that all the authors can answer this question in turn. Yes, so, Mr.
That's okay. So thank you very much for the invitation, for the question. But first of all, I would like to tell you that my English is really not good. I have many rooms in my head. The first room, big room, is the Arabic language. The second one is the German language. And then some rooms are empty, no languages. And then maybe number 5 is in English. And when I try to speak in English, so I have to think in Arabic and go to the German room very quick, and then to the English. So I will be a little bit slowly, make some mistakes, because I need a little bit more time to bring my words from Arabic into German into English. This is first what I would like to tell you. Thank you for the question. I was born in Egypt for Sudanese parents. My mother originally also from Egypt, but her grandfather coming from Sudan. I thought for many years I am Egyptian. I speak the dialects, I am living there, no any problem for Sudanese at that time. And then when I finished my study and tried to continue to get my master's degree, they told me you cannot continue because you are not Egyptian. And non-Egyptian should pay a lot of money, so you are Sudanese. You have to pay a lot of money. So it was a long story. I moved to Iraq. This is a long story. We can speak about it next time when I come to Georgia. And I decided to go to a country so far as I can. And I chose Austria. It was Germany and Austria. And I say Austria will be very fine and good for me. So I went to Austria, and I have 3 shocks. No language, no right clothes, and no money. Really very poor. But I found a job in the first month to work in a very famous newspaper in Austria. It's Kronenzeitung. Everybody say, oh, wow, this is great. I was selling the newspaper on the street for 1.5 years, and then I began to learn German language and to continue at the university, etc. It's a long way, but back to the question. It was, of course, a political point that I had to leave Cairo to go to anywhere to think what can I do. And in Egypt, in Vienna, because it was hard for me and it was very cold for me, I couldn't stay at home. I spent more time in trams and buses, etc., because they have heating. At home, it's very cold. I go in the evening and to sleep. So I began to write. I began to write about families, about my brother, about my friends, but not to publish these things. It was only for me to feel at home. And one day I found that a magazine wanted to publish some text and send it to this magazine, and I published the first book and so. But the question is deeper than that, what I try to speak, because I'm now in the room number 4, and it's not bad that I have this pressure in Egypt not to continue my study, not to live there. It was a challenge to go to Vienna. It was a challenge to go in a new language to try to do this. And really, if you ask me, will you do it again? If you come again to your earlier life, I will do it for sure again. Yes, that's what I want to say. I hope this one was not so long. Thank you.
So there was a political background, related to your choice.
Yeah, because Mubarak at that time was a new president in Egypt, and he decided it is for Egyptian and non-Egyptian to continue the studies. So this was a political.
Thank you. So I think you might expand your just case.
Do you hear me? Yes, it is a very difficult question now that you asked it. Thanks a lot. Really, why did you leave? Okay. Why did you leave? Why did you leave the country you were born in? And now when you asked it, I started to reflect, still listening you, because I have also many rooms. One is to listen and one is to think in the same time. I was very young when I was really young. I was a young adult when I left Germany, and I was born in '63. This is important maybe because I was one of the first second generation after the Second World War. And for us now, it is very far away. But when I grew up in Germany, I had to deal as a child and as a young person with a subject that was very hard to live with, to think how was it possible that the country I love and I grow up has done things like this. I think it started a little bit with a reflection like this. How is this possible? And then there was this incompatibility between my feelings and the objective things that I saw that had been done. And yes, I think we are a whole generation who had to ask ourselves those questions. How was it possible that our grandparents you normally love, did maybe things that you wished had never been done? And so there was a kind of ambiguous relation I grew up with. And in one moment, I felt I have to leave for a moment to get a little distance to the language, distance to the environment, and to maybe to construct something else. This was, I think, the main subject. So it was not a political situation, really, because everything was going well, building up. There was a democracy coming up. There was this élan, very positive élan to do things better and to build new societies, but still there was the shadow of what had been done before. And sometimes I think many people can look back and your eyes go very far and it's very beautiful. When I look back, there is always a wall. There was the wall falling down in '89, but there is also the wall before, because when I look back, there is the horror that I have to confront myself with, or that we are confronted with. So I think these are more or less the reasons why I felt I want to take a little distance. And also I must tell you, in this time, in the 80s, 70s, 80s, there was a whole movement called Neue Poesie, New Poetry, which were poets that said, we have to look for another way to make up poetry because we cannot use a language that had been used to kill people. So, you know, this critical reflection about your language, I think I grow up in this generation who transmitted this to us, the younger ones, and my way to deal with it was to go away for a moment, and then for some reasons I stayed where I went, which was the French part of Switzerland, and it's also very randomly that I started there. So, yes, it was maybe political, but it was not a political situation of the country in this moment. It was more a political reflection. I would tell it like this.
Thank you.
So, my passport is French. I am French. I live in France. But I am bilingual with French and Occitan, which is a minority language. So there is no Occitan passport and no Occitan state. And so I am bilingual, which means also bicultural. And as often when you speak a minority language, even more if you write a minority language, you are a kind of stranger in your own country, or at least a strange thing. And it's funny because I'm published by a very good publisher, and he's in Paris, and he has, and I am in this series, which name is the l'autre langue. So it means the other language. And the subtitle of this series is Ces étranges étrangers qui font le choix d'écrire en français. Those strange strangers who choose to write in French. So the other poets are, for example, Maram al-Masri from Syria, but she lives in France and writes in French, etc., etc. And this is where I am, because there is no room, indeed. There is no room for me. So I am the strange stranger from inside who writes in another language than French.
Thank you.
Okay.
So you have had an experience of living in another country.
Yes. Can you hear me? It's me. Yeah. Actually, my case is slightly different. I was never exiled from my country. I spent half of my life in the huge empire, which I didn't like very much, and I would love to run away from this empire. But it happened only when I was 37, when I had a chance to go abroad. That was already after collapse of Soviet Union, and I went to United States for a year, and it was a big experience for me. It was this sense of kind of interior exile, which I had when I was growing up in Soviet Union. I felt that I belonged to Georgian culture, of course, but on the other hand, I felt some dislike of the official Soviet ideology, which I grew up in that time. And I always had the desire to, at least symbolically, to run away. And my preoccupation with the English language was one of the ways of doing this, because from my early teens, and I went to Soviet school. We had English, by the way, from the second grade. It was a school with a special focus on English. And so the entire pop culture, which was fascinating me that time, this is late 60s and 70s, was in English. And the rock music was in English, the jazz music was in English. Then came English poetry, the poetry written in English language, which is one of the best in the world. So my fascination went deeper and deeper in these terms. But still I couldn't run away. There was no chance. No chance, absolutely. And only then, after I spent some time in States, after the collapse of Soviet Union and the fall of the Iron Curtain, I was already writing in Georgian and had published some books already. I had this weird urge to sit down and write in English, to write a novel in English. I had some kind of experience with writing in English before, some short essays and features and articles, but a novel. So it was another urge, how to run away. And I ran away from everything that was mine before. And I was living in totally different space and home, I would say, because as one German philosopher said, language is the house of being. So I changed. I ran away from my house and occupied another house. And there were many rooms, by the way, which still remain empty, but I loved it. So that's another point in these terms of how language can help you to escape not only the reality which is not acceptable for you, but to escape yourself and turn yourself into something other. That's the point for the beginning.
Thank you very much. Let me expand this question in some more details. As we have heard from most of you, you have had the feeling and have been tortured by the feeling of exile and some kind of idea of escape and being remote. somehow or abandon your culture. And at the same time, this foreign environment and relocation in a kind of cultural way, is related to some kind of language background and understanding and exposure to a different culture. So my question is, how has this influenced this idea of escape and its feeling, which has been with you all the time, maybe in another environment, cultural state, which is as well exposure to new language, and language is part of culture. How has this relocation in terms of many ways, in terms of language, in terms of culture, and with a feeling of escape which has been torturing you for so long, maybe even today, how has this influenced and affected your way of expression in your writing, in your style, and in the topics you have just been conveying in your writing? So the question is, how has this affected your artistic way of expression as a writer?
Okay, thank you. As you know, my mother tongue is Arabic language, and Arabic language is more than 400 years. This is the language is like Latin language, and we still write in this language till today. But we have a challenge. This old language, if I'm writing in this old style, nobody will be happy with this language when I'm writing today in this very old language and Quranic language. This is not good for the people. So I have a big challenge to go out from the roots of the language to express me in this century. It's not easy for me to go, because a lot of people, they don't like this modernism in the language. On the other hand, I moved very late to Europe, and I didn't think I will go to Europe, and I didn't think I will go to a country which I should learn German language. First, I learned a little bit English in Cairo and French, but I didn't think about the language. So it was another challenge to begin to learn German language. And I thought, okay, I came to Vienna when I was 25 years old. It's over to be good in language, but I will think I am a child, and I will go to school again, to the kindergarten, to learn the language. It's not a problem. And I began again, and later I told everyone who asked me, how old are you? After 5-6 years in Austria, I told, I am 6 years old, Austrian time. So we still have problems in our writing in my culture. We have problem if we touch sexuality, if we touch political situation to write about, if we touch religion. And this is the themes which I am writing the whole time, and I have a problem with my books in many countries. They don't allow it to go there. You cannot write about a married woman falling in love in a young man. This will not be happening in Arab countries. But I wrote about this thing. And every time I found it's really crazy. I don't follow all of these things, because I will stop to define, to verteidigen, to defend myself. And I don't have time. It's better to write more and more. That's what I would. Thank you.
Aurelia, so maybe you could just explain why have you chosen Occitan, and what's the difference between when you write in French and when you write in Occitan? Is there any difference in terms of forms, in terms of some kind of concepts you use, and how they, at the same time, how they interrelate with one another, the exposure you have with both of the languages, yeah? As far as I'm concerned, and got from what you have said before, is that you have been bilingual since your childhood, no? Yeah, but you have learned Occitan, yeah, as a foreign language. So how do these two languages at the same time interrelate and intermix in your writings, when you write in French and when you write in Occitan? But firstly, you could explain why you have chosen this language, which is not a very active language today. So
there is no one of my age who is a native speaker of Occitan. So my mother tongue is French, but my father's tongue is Occitan. So I learned it with my dad, but I learned it a bit, I learned it, I think I was around 12 when my dad really began to teach me correctly how to speak the language. And the thing is that there are two levels, two dimensions in the story. Because I had a friend when I was 18 who asked me to write a poem for an English poetry award in Roman languages. And as I spoke Occitan and French, I thought, okay, I will write in Occitan, and they will have to deal with it. And I don't know why this friend asked me to write a poem, because I didn't write poems. So that's how all of a sudden I wrote a poem in Occitan. But of course I think that there is deeper reason in it. It's that as French is my mother tongue, it's the language in which I have been educated. It means, education. It's also what puts frontiers and limits to the reality. Because when you speak with a 2 or 3 years old child, and if you say to this child, look at the tree flying at the window, the child will just look at the window to see a flying tree, because he doesn't know yet that trees cannot fly. And so the mother tongue also has its role of limitation and education, because it goes together. And so when this friend offered me to write a poem, in Roman language, I had the choice between my native language, which also was the language of the school, in which I have learned how to make poetry dissection. It's sometimes the way you learn poetry is not a way at all, a good way to write poetry. And so I was much more free in Occitan language, because I didn't have all the weight of the literary examples, etc. I was just free, because I could explore the world and the writing with more, freedom.
As well, Samuel Beckett, for example, wrote his most works in French first and then translated into English, because of that sense what I have mentioned before, that it gave him some kind of construction or ready-made stuff which he, for example, could not experience in English, which was his mother tongue, for example. So Samuel Beckett. Yeah, so when you write in a foreign language, it's a kind of matter of choice from the writer to be somehow just fixed in a kind of form and not to digress too much from the form. Yeah, so and it gives a sense of freedom in a way, not to be lost in your native language or mother tongue. So maybe you can answer them.
Okay, first of all, it's very funny. We are sitting by side. You go into the German language, and I stepped a little bit apart from the German language. So there is a linking point in between us that is invisible, but it is there. And what does it mean to write in several languages? First of all, when I went in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, I went not there with the aim never to write in German again. It was just a kind of adaptation, as you said. Also, how can you adapt as a writer in a place where you don't speak the language. So you have to take the language and to make it your own material where you can work with. And regarding to the theme of this festival, which is the city, we have many steps and ways and roads into the city where we can walk on. And this morning when I arrived, I made a walk, and then I was very on the top of the hills. And in one place was the urban image of Tbilisi, and on the other side there was just forest, and I was in between. And I thought suddenly, regarding the subject of tonight, writing in several languages is exactly that. You go in a territory that you don't know, and you are always in between some places. And then there was this current of water, and I thought, yes, this is also reflecting the topic of tonight, because language is fluidity, and language has no frontiers, and we can do with language whatever we want. We can speak English, the languages that we are able to speak, and integrate them in our play and our game and our writings. And I think for me this is not a traumatic experience, it's a really joyful and human experience to deal with this multilingualism in my writing or in our writings. And belonging not to me, so before I was writing in German, things that had never been published. Then I moved to Switzerland, I wrote in French, but before I wrote in French, for some reasons, everything I wrote was a kind of mix of language. It was despite me. I think when we speak in the oral environment, we mix the languages like this, like that, but then it happened to me that I was writing with my hand and words come up that even does not exist. And suddenly I made this mixture of poetry, which made me, made my stem for a moment. And then I started to write a novel in French. And later I understood that this mixing language poetry was exactly what in anthropology is called the liminal area. It is to go from one state into another, to make a kind of transformation. And I'm very happy that I was able to live with this transformation and to transform it in poetry, which made up a sentence like rüber, über Berge, Berge, Geste, Geste, gestern, Stern, Stern, Wort. And so I mix German and French, or there is another, we would like if, what about all I am, been so confused, would really, ne peut pas, wieso denn nicht, we have to go. So there is one poem, and inside even a verse, there are 5 languages cohabitating. And for me, multilingual language, multilingual writing, and writing in multilingual contexts is to bring up the message of the possibility of a peaceful and joyful cohabitation.
Thank you. So my next question goes to Zurab Karumidze. So you published novel Dagny Orella Fest in English. It was written in English, yeah? I would like to ask why you have chosen English for this novel. Let me give a brief introduction related to this novel. So this is a story, a novel unfolding the story of Dagny Juel, a Norwegian poetess known for her liaisons with Edvard Munch and August Strindberg, and she was murdered during her stay in Tbilisi in 1901. And we have here a kind of cultural and historic exposure to Georgia. As well, we encounter a number of Georgian figures here, for example, Stalin, and at the same time, young Vazhab-Shavela. So this is a kind of, this novel serves as a kind of cultural retrospect together with this mysticism and different reliefs it has. So why English for this novel? Was this artistic choice? What was it conditioned by?
Now you can hear me, yeah. So there were several reasons for me to to get that much ambitious and choose English language. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, the reason was my fascination with this language from my early teens, fascination with this language due to various reasons. The second one was writing this book. I was thinking about the audience, the readership. And with the English language, I was able to address much broader and wider public than I would have addressed in Georgian, because 3 million people, 3.5 million people speak Georgian. Read, maybe much less. So, but when it comes to the English-speaking audience and English-reading audience, it's huge. So that was the second, very pragmatic reason. The third one was challenge. Challenge as a writer, because I've admired always bilingual writers like Nabokov and Beckett and, I don't know, Oscar Wilde also was bilingual. English was not his native tongue. Even Joyce was bilingual. Yeah. English was not his tongue. So that was a challenge for me. I thought maybe I'll try and do this. It was like, again, to get back to this original metaphor of escaping from your home, from the house of being, from your language. Yeah, it's about getting into some forbidden territory. At least the territory which is unknown to you to an extent, you know, especially when you get deep into it and you want to touch everything, smell everything, taste everything. I had the same feeling when I was writing in English. I had some experience with English. I've been doing it, as I said, from my early teens. I've been learning and studying it. But still, when I was writing it, I had this weird sense, you know, of having more freedom. Not just in political, no, there was no problem with political freedom or cultural freedom here. But, I mean, every language carries with it the culture, the cultural context, the texts which have been written in this language. And with the English language, a huge world was coming, you know, towards me. And I could delve into it. I could just play with everything that was coming to my mind, feeling less restriction within me. I was feeling much more free when writing in English and less careful when I write in Georgian. When I write in Georgian, I'm very careful what the readers would say. Not because of politics again, but because of their taste and of their attitude towards language. But when I was doing it in English, I was just absolutely careless, as if I'm a stranger in the land. And you know, when you're on a jolly trip abroad, you can permit yourself doing things which you would never do in your hometown. This is also happening. At least that was how I grew up. So that's why. So it was an adventure, and this attraction to being part of an adventure was one of the reasons that I started this novel. I ventured this novel in English. This is the only novel I have written in English. The rest of my stuff is in Georgian. But again, I enjoyed this year and a half. Besides, I was not writing this novel in the English language country, be it Britain or America or Australia or New Zealand. No, I was writing it here in Tbilisi, in Haique, on a tennis street, surrounded by illegal construction and nasty sounds and filthy air and everything. But I was sitting, I was not there. I was somewhere else. And that's what made me happy. No, I've been writing some, it's not a novel, it's a play. I've been writing it in English, but now I got stuck and I switched again back to Georgian.
Thank you. As you have explained first, yeah.
შენ ეს რომანი არ თარგმნე ქართულად, სხვა თარგმნა და ახლა ხანს გამოვიდა. ახლა ისა ნაბოკოვი ახსენე და ნაბოკოვს მაგალითად ლოლიტა აქვს გადმორუსულებული, თუ შეიძლება ასე ითქვას და აი ეს სურვილი რატომ არ გაგიჩნდა? დროის ტურიზმი.
The question is that when I wrote this novel in English, I was against translating it into Georgian. My point was that I wrote this novel not for Georgians. It's for non-Georgians. It's for the outer world. And so 15 years after it was written, it came out in Georgian. So last year it came out in Georgian also. And I was myself kind of apprehensive about it. How all this imagery and all this stuff and all these stories would sound in Georgian. Because I was afraid of some perception of, banality or triteness for Georgian readers. But no, it was not like that. Although, again, I'm maintaining that this novel was not written for Georgians. And that's why I didn't want to have it translated. Because it was written for non-Georgian speakers, and it was written by another man, not me. Another man who suddenly went crazy and started writing in English.
And was it another man who made the translation, or was it yourself?
No, it was another lady who made this translation.
So it was not
an old friend of mine, by the way.
And the question was, why didn't you who translated it, and why
Again,
it was another person?
Answering Shota's question, because there is an old saying, never get back to where you've been happy once. So I didn't want to get back to this thing where I was happy. Especially translation makes it really difficult.
Thank you. And the next question I would like to ask, maybe it's suitable for everybody here. So it could be related to the process you deal with and challenges you deal with when you write in your own language and when you write in a different language, for example, which is not your native language. Is there any difference in terms of choice of the issues you would like to look at and examine in your writing? And at the same time, is there any difference in form? So the process, what's the difference in process? For example, when you write in Georgian and when you write in English, or when you write in French or Occitan, how does it go? So maybe you can start.
Okay, so it's funny because when I wrote these poems in Occitan, then I wrote this first poem and I discovered I loved it, so I wrote a full book, and I was not at all pragmatic because few people read poetry, even less in Occitan, as you can guess. Just read Occitan, as you can guess. And so I had this book published by the Occitan publisher in Toulouse. And then I was invited to a festival. And I don't know how, indeed, because I could not share my poems with people understanding it. So I tried to translate it, and I was very unhappy. And some friends offered to translate it into French, and it was worse, even worse than when I tried to do it. And I thought, but I love writing poetry, and I love sharing it, so I will have to find a way. But the way could not be translating because I tried, and it was a failure. So I just discovered a very simple process, which is to write bilingually. So I write, for example, 2-3 sentences, lines, in Occitan, and then I put it into French. But as I am creating the poem, I can do whatever I want. So at the moment I pass in the other language, I rewrite because I have other kind of sounds in my head and other correspondences because of French, which is different. And so then I have to rewrite Occitan, etc., etc. So in the end, I have created an original poem in 2 languages, and there is no version, not any version that is the original, because that's how the poem is. And, well, that is the process.
Thank you.
I will go to another room. And I think, for me, thinking does not need grammar. You don't need the cases, accusative, nominative, etc. In my case, I think only about verbs and nouns. And the rest is not important for me. This is when I'm thinking. When I'm writing, I have a big problem. It's like a person who's sitting at home with pyjama, he's walking, dancing, shouting, everything is free. But when he was going on the street, it's a different rules. He have to take care. And so when I'm writing the language, I have to take care of the grammar, I have to take care of sentences, etc. In my case, I try to write in German languages, but only articles. Till today, I cannot write poetry in German language because my thinking is also coming from right to left, yeah, like my language. So I go deep in my language. I have my mistakes and I can see it. In German language, when I begin to write in German, the first thing is coming to me is the grammar. Der, die, das, den, dem. So I am out of thinking. I am out of thinking. So it's better to write in my language. It's better to write in my language and then to correct it later or to give it to someone else. If I'm writing in German or other language, I have to give it to somebody else to correct it. And I don't find, this is maybe crazy, I don't find any difference between poetry and novels and short stories. This will be crazy maybe. All of them is, for me, is the same. It's just an idea you would like to bring it to the people. I don't have big differences between movies and theater and even paintings. Yes, so I come back to say thinking does not need rules, just thinking of verbs for me and nouns. Maybe it's an Arabic thinking too, maybe. Thank you.
Getting back to this question, well, many people here, like me, grew up in the multilingual space because Soviet Empire was multilingual. We had, I mean, people of my generation in this city had at least 3 languages. They grew up with these 3 languages. I mean, it was Georgian as native, Russian as official, and also native to an extent, and English for my generation. For the generation of my father and mother, it was German. For the generation of my grandparents, it was French, the 3rd language. I mean, so we always would. I grew up on this street. It was one of the most multi-ethnic streets in Tbilisi, and we were hearing many languages. But these 3 languages would be very actively interfering and fusing with each other. I realized when I grew up that I'm thinking in 3 languages. I can think, I think in Georgian, I think in Russian, and I think in English too. My wife told me early during our marriage that you speak English in your dreams. So this is also an indication that the language has gone kind of deep into the subconscious. Again, writing in the non-native language, it's the experimentation with freedom. It's a search for the self, search for the new abilities in you, and experimentation with freedom. There are many ways of experimenting with freedom. One of the ways that I chose was writing, jumping into this ocean, which is called English language, and learning how to swim. That's it.
As well, it becomes part of your identity somehow, yeah? Cultural and, yeah, and
yes,
shapes
cultural
and
identity, yeah, actually, yeah. I have problems with my cultural identity. There's so many identities cultural that I care. But I care that, you know, it is my destiny, not only my destiny, of many Georgians. It is our destiny to carry many cultural identities. And maybe this is our advantage and our strength as well.
Thank you.
Yes, I like this vision of freedom in experimentation, freedom that what I was talking about, peace before, it is something peaceful that you transmit, and this cohabitation of several languages in ourselves, this multilingualism, is that we maybe have the privilege not to live in terms of dominant languages, because we have a kind of equality in between them, and we can deal with these languages, and they will influence our thinking. I don't even cannot anymore imagine how it is to think in a monolingual way, because everything will always refer to another sound, to another image, to another culture, and it's just very peaceful. It's very wonderful, and of course, I will not hide now when I have to write in French, which is not my, because you speak about the difficulty of German, which is my mother tongue, but when I have to write in French, I can tell you it is a real disaster to go to, you have to take every word, every look, is there the right declination, the right of this and that, and it is a process that is a little bit different, and the loop goes more closer to a word than I will use it maybe in a German language. But on the other hand, it brought me back to the fact to make the same process when I deal with my mother tongue. So there is always this coming and going, being precise here, thinking I can do it just like this there, but then to see, okay, now I have also to have the same instruments and to apply them to every language that I want to write in or to use. And this is a very interesting and passionating process to deal with these different languages.
Thank you. And my next question is for Tariq. So you've been teaching in a Western university, and you have direct exposure to Western culture. And I would like to ask, how does this Western and Eastern world just meet in your artistic way of expression? If it has any kind of exposure and impressive way it has found in your creative aesthetics, for example?
Of course, when I came to Vienna, I told you I didn't know any word in German. Even I didn't know the word Ausgang at the airport. It means exit. I wanted to go to the cinema in the beginning without any languages, but I didn't find any friend from my country he would like to go with me to the cinema or to the theater. So, are you crazy? Why you want to go to a coffee house to pay a lot of money for coffee, and you can buy it from Hofer or Spar? It was not Spar. It's very cheap. I told him I would like to sit inside these people. I would like to live in this screen. I would like to stay in this country, to swim in this country. It takes a long time for me to live in Austria, to try to as I told you before, I'm thinking in all language. This is really free for me, thinking in many languages, a little bit English, any word that's come from in, thinking is free. But writing is a little problem in my. I am dreaming in German language, and I speak with my mother in German language. I don't know which language she gave me the answer, but the whole time is for me now is German slowly. I cannot explain it now. I need a little bit, maybe 25 years more to explain it, how really to go from right to left as I'm writing, and to go also again from left to right. But I will try to find the point of meeting in the middle and to feel really peace. And I'm feeling well. I'm really very happy. Inside me is good.
Eastern and Western world meet
yes,
in your poems, poetry.
The problem is sometimes outside of me. We spoke about this yesterday. Somebody asked me, are you Sudanese or Egyptian or you have the nationality Austrian? And I say, I am the three person in one. I am Austrian, I am Egyptian, and I am Sudanese. And they said, no, please tell us only one. I said, no, I have no borders. My mother is Egyptian, my father is Sudanese, my wife is Austrian, and I'm living in Austria. I can speak German, I speak my mother tongue, the dialect from my mother, etc. I live in all of this. It's very wide and no borders, and I love it. If you don't like it, it's your problem, it's not mine. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've got a specific question, I think, for Heike. So you work in experimental way of writing, yeah? And you have different experiments. So I would like to ask, how does it just incorporate in your style? Just if you could speak more about this, your experiments in writing and incorporating and mixing different poets and different visuals and performances and stuff.
Okay,
how does it work?
It's difficult to talk about. The best is to come tomorrow night. If the electricity will work, I will make a reading where I will use sound and visual projections. So I think this is all linked to the question of multilingualism. There is no doubt. I came to another place. I wrote with different languages, and this mixing of styles and mixing, I wrote a novel, I write poetry, we all write different things, and I think this is kind of fluidity without borders of genders or tools that I then later took. And I have just to make a little way back in Germany, because despite all I said, I'm very linked to German literature and German poetry, and really I love it a lot, and my heritage is coming definitely from the German literary field. So there was a really strong movement when I was young, which was called sound poetry and visual poetry. So inside the field of the written poetry in verse and strophes, as we usually are used to it, some poets, women and men, they came up and they said, we can make poetry with sounds or with visuals. So suddenly one letter of one word or one word by itself became a whole poem, and one word with two sounds became a whole poem by itself. And I come from this background. And then dealing myself with electronics, visual and sound, the question is, how can I, doing myself sound poetry and visual poetry, how can I transmit this in the space? How can I share this with the public when I'm making a reading? And this is how I brought up to become familiar with electroacoustic music and with visual projections that are integrated in my work. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you. So I think that our discussion has just reached its end. So I would like to ask if the authors here would like to add anything they would like to share with the public. And if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask. Okay, I will translate if you could ask. Okay. Mamagla to shade the
ხო, კი ბატონო.
Yeah.
ქართულად ვთქვა ინგლისურად? English? ინგლისურად მირჩენ. So thank you very much for the fascinating conversation. I wanted to ask about the following. In Georgia, we have this notion of the purity of language. We are very partial to our language, and we try to care for its purity. And I was wondering, when you experiment with different languages or different dialects, perhaps in Arabic, is it okay for the critics? I mean, what do people say? Do people say that, or maybe Occitan and French, do people say that, oh, you know, you're not using pure language, you're, I don't know, spoiling our language? I was just wondering, how is the reception when these experiments happen? Thank you.
So, to whom is your question addressed? To all of them?
To all
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I give a very spontaneous answer. Because I really experiment with languages when I mix languages, and of course I heard exactly this is not pure language. And there I must say, for me, this here is then a political statement, because of what I was telling you before. This notion of purity has for me not just a positive connotation, and I think for me, it's very personal. It was the desire to break this up, to transgress, and I really deliberately make linguistic transgressions, and I live with linguistic transgressions, and I know also there are many critics. So I understand in one side an author using his language and using it carefully and wanting it to transmit. Of course, we have to do this. There's no, I don't make it doubt. Just this notion of purity, this is for me something, as a writer, I try to find other ways to deal with it.
So it is very political. So there are two dimensions, because I write in two languages. So for someone who speaks French in France, speaking and even worse, writing in a minority language is not really understandable, because as you know, minority language should be called minorized language, and because they are not minor, but they are underestimated. And in France it is very strong, because it's very recent that Occitan or Breton or Basque are called languages in French. They were called patois, and this word has no synonym. It's a very French speciality. And so this is, so of course it's not considered as pure, because it's not even considered as a language. It's a way to speak in the country, you know, and a way to talk to cows. And but then when I discovered Occitan, when I learned Occitan at university, I discovered the very positive dimension, the troubadour's heritage, the Nobel Prize, Frédéric Mistral, etc. Okay, and I discovered the people inside the small Occitan world who fight about the purity of Occitan, you know, and it is very complicated, because we have many, you know, there are plenty of dialects. I speak one Occitan dialect, and so there is no end to this question.
Thank you very much for your time to be here. If you have any more questions...
Should I give the answer for them? Yeah?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I have a question.
You know, when I was a child, I was speaking for 6 years my mother tongue, and my mother tongue was different than the classical Arabic. And when I went to school, I didn't understand what is in the school. This is like Latin. And so I didn't understand the news, because it's in classical Arabic. And on Fridays, also when I go to the mosque with my father, I didn't understand a lot. So people should write, they should write in classical Arabic, in the Arabic, because it's a holy language. And if you go out of this holy language, you have a big problem. And so a lot of people try later, for 200 years ago, to write in dialect. And this is a revolution. And this is not a pure language. Yeah? But when you come to write a theater, for example, a play, you need to write it in dialect. Because the people they are really very, very intelligent. They have some proverbs you cannot find in any holy book. Yeah? So this is still, till today, as a challenge, because we still use also the language from up for power and for political situation too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, just one question. I won't ask it to all the authors, but I will just, if someone has an idea. A few years ago, UNESCO wrote a publication which is called Multilingualism in the Cyberspace. So, as you know, internet has had quite a big impact on languages. In fact, there are some languages that continue to survive because of internet, because different ethnic groups can talk to each other over internet. So this is one of the impact. So I would just like to know if any of you have any particular views on maybe the positive or the negative impact of internet or multilingualism. And just as I say that, I would just like to give one quote from Hermann Hesse, who said, "Learn another language, gain another soul." I think that is a very beautiful thing to say.
Yeah, the same kind of saying we have in Georgia. The amount of languages you speak, this is the amount of personalities you are. That's it. Again, multilingualism is a very interesting thing. It's a double-edged sword, like the internet itself. On one hand, the internet provides access to information, openness, crossing borders, etc. On the other hand, the internet is the place where terrorists can meet and discuss their plans, etc. And people remain linked to their indigenous groups, not globally thinking, but still part of their internet communities, I'd say, which is also very narrowing. The same is about multilingualism. Again, to me, I'm a freak of jazz. I love jazz music very much. To me, multilingualism is like jazz. You improvise with many languages, with many voices. Especially for the Georgian, for whom polyphony is a known thing, you can improvise with many languages. And I said, writing in the foreign languages like experiment with freedom. This is more experiment with freedom. It depends how we develop it. There are some dystopian novels which suggest the language of the future, which is the mixture of Chinese, English, Arabic, Russian, everything. It's multilingual language. It's multilingual society, but several languages in one. That's what I mean. But that's dystopian, I would say. I don't know what's the future of the small languages like Georgian or yeah. So what will be? But my idea is that multilingualism has the future, and we will end up with one language which will comprise some remnants of other existing languages, which will never exist that time already.
Thank you.
Maybe I just want to give you one answer to us. Internet, there is a big discourse in literature and internet, this conflict. And if in the one way it is true that it is provoking a kind of making language more poor, and on the other hand, as you said, there are marginalized linguistic communities who find themselves through internet. So there are both forces. And what is important, that we us as citizens, we don't lose the control over internet, and we will always be conscious what can happen with the new technologies, what can they do to us, which is not really very joyful in any aspect. So we have to take the control. Patti Smith had this song, "People Have the Power," and we have to take not internet becoming the power too much over us, because there are already these discussions about the autonomous arms that will kill people without our consent, and who will be then the responsible. And this responsibility we never have to get out of the hand and always deal with it.
It's also linked with the education, I would say, the aim of the education, because the future belongs not to the access to the information, which is flowing into you like a stream, but the creative way of processing this information, how to process it creatively. This is the future.
Thank you. You
And
both
not
gave,
just devouring of information.
you both gave very UNESCO arguments. Thank you. Thank you very much. And UNESCO is also the sponsor of the International Jazz Day for 10 years. So.
Are there any more questions from the audience you would like to ask? Yeah. Thank you very much for your time here. I'm sure that you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
დიდი მადლობა ყველას, ცოტა ხანი შევისვენოთ და სულ მალე ძალიან საინტერესო საღამო ლიბანელი ავტორის იმან ჰუმაიდანის 5 წუთში შემოვიდეთ უკან.